We are entrusting the day and the endeavor to the Lord. Let's go. Welcome to my channel where I visit many good books but live in the Bible. My name is Sarah Christine, and today I'm going to talk about Yesteryear by Claire Burke. I picked this up because a dear sister in Christ, who I will call Legally Blondie, texted me asking if I had read Yesteryear yet, and I was like, what is that? And she told me, oh, it is about a trad wife influencer who wakes up one day in the 1800s and has to actually live the life she has been cosplaying online. And I was like, say less. I went to Barnes & Noble the next day and bought this. And y'all, I never buy hardback books. I am a mass market paperback girly all the way because hardbacks are heavy. And when I'm reading, I don't want to become a shrimp, but I had to read this. If I were to sum up Yesteryear in a song, it would have to be Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, the king of pop, because our leading lady, trad wife influencer Natalie Mills, proves that you gotta be careful who you love and be careful what you do because a lie becomes the truth. And when that happens, the awakening is rude.
It's the worst.
If you haven't yet read Yesteryear, this book has become the book of the summer. Like, it was a Good Morning America pick. Anne Hathaway is going to star in the film adaptation, and it topped the New York Times bestseller list. That said, it has also ruffled some feathers because of how the author, Claire Burke, chose to portray so-called good Christians, which is as hypocritical, judgmental, power-hungry, and performative, with, of course, a toxic relationship between the sexes. This is page 372, Natalie speaking. I didn't wonder once. I have become, hear me when I say this, a good mother effing Christian woman. I do not anymore ask questions of my husband that he does not want to hear. And my husband, oh yes, a very good Christian man, does not tell me things I do not need to know. In the Christian Yesteryear verse of Claire Burke, the ideal woman is beautiful and brainless with an assembly line uterus. Woman essentially means womb on. And I know there are nutters who believe that women's sole purpose is to have babies. And don't get me wrong, I love babies. But it's just not true. And to the folks who believe that woman basically means womb on, y'all gotta reckon with the fact that God made menopause. Like, the Almighty really said, here is a womb off switch. And he doesn't yoink us like an IUD from the face of his planet when it gets flipped. For the record, for the vast majority of female animals, fertility's end does equal life's expiration. But for the adult human female, God has made it abundantly clear that there is more than one way for us to be generative. So yes, woman does not mean womb on. And the fact that God made menopause should give the men who believe that nonsense pause. On the other hand, I was recently having a conversation with a mentor of mine who told me about another one of her mentees who recently got married and is in her mid-20s, who told her she is planning to wait 8 years before even trying to have a baby. And y'all, I was like, 8 years? This girl is cuckoo banana pants. I mean, I have friends in their mid-20s who have already struggled with infertility, and this girl is fixing to send 96 eggs down the tampon before even trying for babies? That's crazy. All that to say, reading the toxic description of men and women in Yesteryear made me distill what I would inject in the battle between the sexes, which is men. God made menopause. But also, ladies, how many eggs do you want to willfully send down the tampon? For some of the women in this book, the answer to that question is quite a lot. And we get a good look at them because before Natalie went full trad wife, she actually attended Harvard for a year where she encountered many, quote, angry women who are putting off procreation with the same zeal that the United Nations has when it comes to putting off nuclear proliferation. In Natalie's words on page 61, at Harvard, I'd found myself in a highly claustrophobic holding tank for rich kids, an artificially intelligent Eden, a warm, incubated landscape designed to keep the worst kids in America safe and warm and well-fed until they matured past the urge to peck each other's eyes out. No one was grateful to be here. As far as I could see, no one was grateful for anything at all. They all planned to be wives and mothers, and yet they absolutely hated men and kids. They talked about nuclear families the same way they talked about the nuclear bomb. Y'all, reading that, I was like, oh, Carol Claire Burke knows the world of elite colleges, because while I do not go to Harvard, I go to a school like it. And let me just tell you, there is more than a little truth in that description. And I want to linger a bit here because it relates to one of the major reasons why I am so glad that I read Yesteryear, which is the fact that it made me reflect on what makes good criticism. And in my opinion, personal experience and or intimate knowledge of the thing being critiqued, as Burke clearly has when it comes to satirizing girl boss collegiate elites, is huge. To that end, I often think about what C.S. Lewis said when he was pressed by people to write more about certain sins, and Lewis replied, "I will not indulge in futile philippics against enemies I never met in battle." Lewis wasn't interested in casting aspersions on things that he didn't know well or struggle against himself, and I think that's a profound principle that is both prudent and practical. Because if you criticize something that you don't know well, one, you don't know it well, so why are you talking smack? And two, you invite the people who do know it well, who have personal experience and intimate knowledge, to look at what you've said and say, this person's an ignoramus.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Which has happened with Yesteryear. More than a few reviewers have called out the fact that Carol Claire Burke does not seem to have deep or intimate knowledge of people and communities with earnest and more conservative religious convictions. From what I understand, while Burke went to Catholic school for a bit, her family wasn't particularly religious, and she got a good chunk of her research and information about religious people from Reddit, which is ironic given that Yesteryear portrays internet forums like the manosphere as being super sensational and highly unreliable. My point is that being knowledgeable makes a critique both more effective and more credible. And the proof is in the efficacy of Burke's satirization of girl boss collegiate elites, and in the clunkiness of her satirization of conservative Christianity. Which brings me to the second thing I think it is so worthwhile to have before you put somebody on blast. And full disclaimer, it is something that I all too often lack, which is love for them. It sounds crazy, I know, but I point you to the Bible and the Proverbs 27:6 principle, where we are told, trustworthy are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceptive. In essence, if somebody who loves you tells you that you're out of line or that you have up and lost your mind, you can trust their critique far more than you can trust even the smooches of an enemy. Which makes sense, because a friend wants good for you. They want you to thrive, even if they see places that need a little snip snip, that need to be pruned. Whereas an enemy, they just want to tear you up at the root. In reading Yesteryear and in seeing some of the public comments that Carol Claire Burke has made, my impression is that she is not particularly inclined for people she perceives as conservative Christians to thrive, at least not without them first being lobotomized. Which, let me be clear, does not mean she cannot criticize. It just means that her critique ease will be less inclined to trust her heart or her intentions, which in turn disinclines them to listen. And as someone who in real life I suspect Carol Claire Burke would assess as being a more conservative Christian, I'll just say that I wasn't particularly compelled by her satirization, but I was convicted by the fact that I too am all too often prone to be unfamiliar and unloving when I put somebody on blast. And I need to stop doing that. Because while it is all too easy to be unfamiliar and unloving, a total tear up by the rooter, Ephesians 4:29 tells us that we are to let no unwholesome talk come from our mouth, but only what is good for building up those in need, that they might give grace to all who hear. I'm not sure that was the ambition of Yesteryear. All that said, it is fine and even necessary at times to give critiques, but if we neither know folks' experiences nor love them as people, it is a good idea to pump the critical brakes rather than floor the criticize gas pedal. That was a major takeaway for me, but when it comes to the actual story. The biggest lesson learned, and y'all, I wrote it over a dozen times in the margin, was don't marry a loser. While Yesteryear definitely took digs at trad wifery and traditional gender roles, I came away from the reading experience with a much more universalizable principle, which is regardless of apparent value alignment, lifestyle matches, and economic status, ladies, do not marry a man with the depth and growth potential of a petri dish.
You know your way around a petri dish.
In Proverbs 12:4, King Solomon wrote that a wife of substance is her husband's crown, but one who is incompetent, who causes shame, is rottenness to his bones. And I think that's a good for the goose, good for the gander observation. We can apply Solomon's words of wisdom on wives to husbands. So girls, if you want to grow rot in your bones, marry the man who, in the words of Edward Fairfax Rochester, it makes you blush to own.
Sicko. Where's Latrell?
For Natalie, her husband Caleb isn't shirtless on a dance floor. He is a Nepo baby incel ne'er-do-well that she met at Harvard. She met him, married him in a whirlwind, got pregnant, and shortly after their baby is born, Natalie regrets her decision. Page 109. This was the moment the crisis became clear to me. This was the moment I realized my husband was an actual, honest-to-God idiot when he suggested with all the sincerity in the world that I might like to bring our 2-week-old newborn with me on a jog. I imagined Clementine's tiny brain bouncing around like a bruised fruit in her Play-Doh skull while I stumbled through an asthma attack on some nearby sidewalk, phone to my ear, waiting for someone at home to pick up. On one of our early dates, Caleb had said he wasn't book smart. But that wasn't the full truth, was it? The full truth was that he wasn't anything smart. He was a nice, dumb, rich kid. Shortly thereafter, they move in with Caleb's parents, and Natalie hopes that they will stage an intervention, but she quickly realizes that Caleb's mom and dad had hoped that she would make their son grow up. On page 131, Caleb's dad tells Natalie, "We thought a wife and baby might make him grow up," Doug said. "Help him become a man, but we were wrong." He swirled his glass around, aerating it, his eyes on me. A shriek of fear whistled through me. All this time that I'd been hoping Caleb's parents would fix their son, they were hoping the same of me. After her talk with his parents, Natalie resolves she will make Caleb a man.
Be a man.
Natalie inquisitions him and finds out that Caleb dreamed as a kid of being a cowboy or an actor, and she picks the better of the two options. And so Yesteryear Farm begins, with Natalie running herself ragged to make Caleb's adolescent fantasy of being John Wayne a reality. And in reading all that Natalie did, I was again reminded of King Solomon's juxtaposition between a spouse of substance and one of incompetence. Because instead of Caleb being a husband of substance who can provide anchoring ballast amidst life's storms, he is a bubble of a man whose wife has to create a serene stage where he can play and be kept away from strong winds and any and all inconveniences. All the while, she is constantly like gassing him up lest he hit the ground and pop. Honestly, Natalie feels like she can't even take a breath or he will burst. Or worse, people will see past the fantasy into the rotten reality of their yesteryear farce. And that is exactly what happens when Natalie's mom and sister come to visit the farm. Page 214. I was suddenly shocked, nearly bowled over by how utterly pathetic the situation was. The situation meaning my life. My children, my husband, my home, Yesteryear Ranch, our stupid effing farm. Why had I thought this would work? She was right, she being Natalie's mom. Of course, I'd known it all along. In the quietest part of me, we were failing at make-believe. My husband was not a natural John Wayne. I was not an effortless housewife. We could fool our loved ones from afar, but up close, you could smell it. Something rotten in the air. Again, paraphrasing Solomon in Proverbs 12:4, a spouse of substance, a ballast of a person who can provide anchoring amidst life's storms, they are a crown. But a spouse who is incompetent, who is like a bubble of a person, constantly needing your breath, your oxygen, just to stay afloat, like they are going to be rottenness to your bones. Natalie learned that the hard way, so learn from her and don't marry a loser. But also be careful not to fall into the trap of totalizing bad experiences, because then you'll end up like Natalie and, ironically, the angry women she holds in so much contempt, because both Natalie and them disdain and even detest all men. We see Natalie's attitude come through on page 129 when she says, "There comes a point in every marriage when a woman realizes that the man she married is a freak. This is inevitable. It cannot be avoided. The only real question in the matter is what type of freak your husband will be. Meaning, if you are lucky, you will find out your husband is preternaturally into vintage children's train sets, and you will not find out that your husband pays high school cheerleaders for sex. That is the best we homemakers can hope for in this life, a man whose freakishness is not unspeakably violent or technically illegal, and therefore is something we are able to bear." Later, when Natalie tries to envision what her life would have been like without the albatross of Caleb around her neck, she actually doesn't feel any better, because as she says on page 310, "If I didn't marry Caleb, I would have married someone else." And by that time, to Natalie, marriage to any man is a foretaste of hell. Which is an unfortunate and not at all Christian perspective, because do you know what happens at the end of the world according to the Bible?
The Old Testament wrath.
Judgment, Captain?
It's a wedding celebration. We are told in Revelation 19 about the marriage supper of the Lamb, where we, the church, the bride of Christ, will finally be united with our bridegroom, Jesus, the Son of Man and the Lord of life. In fact, that is what heaven is. It is unity with and marriage to Jesus. So though Natalie's hellish view of men and marriage is understandable, it is not biblical. Which brings me to the fact that Natalie as a character is light years, or shall I say, yesteryears, away from being an accurate picture of a mature Christian believer. And ordinarily, I would never say something like that, because we are told in 1 Samuel 16:7 that we look on the outward appearances, but God is the one who looks within. Like, He is the one to judge whether or not someone is truly a Christian. However, Yesteryear is a first-person narrative. Like, we are in Natalie's head, and I can just tell you, this girl, she does not have the mind of Jesus. And there are not one, not two, but three clear indicators of this. The first of which is her prayer practice. When it comes to Natalie's prayer life, it is not what I would call robust. For instance, the most frequent prayer she says is, "Sorry, Lord," whenever she uses the F word or calls another woman the B word in her head. Not exactly a Psalm of David, but that said, "Sorry, Lord" is great. Like, it is wonderful that Natalie is conscious of the fact that God knows everything that is going on inside our heads, and that she is also aware of the Matthew 12:36 principle that we will give an account in the day of judgment for every careless word that we speak, whether internally or externally. Like, that is why my fairy godmother got me this thing. In point of fact, the more troubling thing about Natalie's prayer life is not the content, it is her attitude towards the practice. The best example of this appears on page 142 when Natalie gives us a summary of her morning routine. Dawn. Wake to whiny snuffling, fumble through the darkness until fingers wrap around cool wooden edge of crib, change diaper, breastfeed, 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 rock, rock, rock. Put baby back to sleep, walk past snoring husband to guest bedroom down the hall, turn on light, sit down at desk, open laptop, and click on file labeled Caleb, resume. Tweak, 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 fudge, 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 3.4 GPA, previously rounded up from 3.3, now rounded farther up to 3.5. Submit resume to at least 5 job openings, optimizing for respectable but relatively unchallenging work. Look out the window, watch the sunrise, pray. There are several passages like this where Natalie presents a laundry list of mundane activities she clearly resents, and the back end, like the anus of that list, is talk to Jesus. To me, it read like prayer was just another mundane and much resented chore that Natalie just had to cross off her to-do list. And to tell you the truth, I started to flinch every single time I got to it, because to me, it read like Natalie viewed prayer the way I viewed my blood meter when I used to have to prick my finger 3 times a day, where it's like, I gotta do this, but hate. Y'all, from a Christian perspective, prayer, that is, talking to the creator of the universe, is not a nuisance. It is a privilege secured by the blood of Jesus. It was Jesus' death that tore the veil of separation that had existed between us and God since our fall in Genesis. Like Hebrews 10:19-20 tells us, by the blood of Jesus, we have the confidence to enter the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go formally, by the new and living way which has been open to us through the curtain of Jesus's crucified flesh. Jesus's death gave us direct divine access. I mean, it's laid out in Mark 15:37-38. When Jesus breathed his last, like at that moment, the curtain of the temple, the curtain of the Holy of Holies, was torn in two from top to bottom. God was not being ambiguous. Jesus's death and our ability to talk to God direct, that was literally cause and effect. So yes, having fellowship with God is not a chore. It is what Jesus Christ died for. And the fact that Natalie doesn't seem to appreciate that or get that at all is a pretty clear sign that she has an inchoate view both of Jesus and of the gospel. The second indicator that Natalie Heller-Mills is not a good picture of a mature Christian believer is the fact that she measures her life not by Jesus Christ, but by one of the first so-called angry women she encountered in her life. We see that on page 147 when we get Natalie's new and improved morning routine. Middle of the night, wake up, shower, wash and condition hair, exfoliate, shave, blow dry hair, curl hair, layer creams and pigments onto skin, foundation, blush, eyelash curler, mascara, brow liner. As your mother-in-law would say, the bare minimum. While the sun rises outside, stare at reflection in the bathroom mirror, inspecting for flaws. Practice saying, it's nothing. Practice saying, I just like starting my day with a little bit of me time. Swallow the rising misery and throat. Swallow the fury. Swallow the anxiety. Swallow the desire to light the house on fire and walk out the front door while husband, baby, and in-laws burn to death. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Kill yourself. No. Conjure the audience. Conjure Jesus. Conjure mother. Conjure Rena. Yes. That's the ticket. Rena was Natalie's roommate at Harvard who ended up punching her in the face after Natalie called Rena a hoe in front of a bunch of popular girls Rena was trying to impress, and also told them that Rena had lied about being assaulted and was in fact the real predator in the kind of Me Too situation. Now, Natalie did not have a high view of secular progressive girl boss Rena back then, and yet in her supposedly Christian trad life era, Natalie is constantly conjuring not Jesus, but Rena in order to guide how she acts. You know how we used to have those sort of rubber bracelets that would say WWJD, what would Jesus do? Natalie's would say WWRD, what would Rena do? On page 216, Natalie literally thinks, what would Rena do? The thought snuck in before I could stop it. How would someone like Rena respond? In 2 Corinthians 10:12, the Apostle Paul writes that when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they show that they are without wisdom and are behaving like fools. Therefore, asking what would Rena do instead of what would Jesus do is again clear indicator number 2 that Natalie has some real Christian growing up to do. Lastly, the third and final indicator that Natalie Heller-Mills is not representative of seasoned Christianity is that this girl, she does not turn the other cheek. I talked a bit about this in my recent review of Shusaku Endo's novel Silence, but if you want to assess like the true inwardness of a human being, you gotta give them a knocking. You gotta see how a person, in this case Natalie, reacts when life gives them a smack. And in Natalie's case, she attacks. Towards the end of Yesteryear, Natalie confronts her assistant Shannon about the fact that Shannon has been sleeping with our resident Petri dish bubble man, Caleb, Natalie's husband. And by the end of the conversation, Natalie's hands are around Shannon's neck. Like WWRD, Rena did this. Natalie's like, I also choose violence. Conversely, Galatians 5:22 through 23 tells us that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. When we look at Natalie, we've got an empty fruit bowl. Ipso facto, Natalie Heller-Mills cannot be an example of sincere and serious Christianity, because when you encounter a mature believer, someone who has not only said but lives in accord with Galatians 2:20, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, they not only are full of fruit, like their bowl overflows, they can take anything. They can say, not just go ahead and slap me on the cheek, but go ahead and bite me, make me bleed like Christ on Calvary, and then taste and see if when you do me injury, the fruit of my reply is heavenly, is loving, is joyful, is peaceable, is patient, is kind, is good, is gentle, is faithful, is self-controlled. The exemplar of this, of course, being Luke 23:34, when Christ on the cross cried out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That, not this, is heavenly fruit. To sum up this section, in those three major respects, her prayer practice, her measuring stick, and how she reacts when she gets bit, Natalie Heller-Mills is not an example of a mature Christian. So if you have read or do read Yesteryear, I hope you don't come away from it thinking that Natalie is a depiction of what it means to follow Jesus. And now the final thing I want to discuss today, how reading Yesteryear helped me see the difference between being influential and being invitational. On page 217, in one of her "What would Rena do" moments, on the heels of a personal humiliation, Natalie decides to post a thirst trap. The answer came down from on high: post a thirst trap. Thirst trap, noun, slang, a social media post, especially a selfie or other photo, intended to elicit sexual attention, appreciation of one's attractiveness, or other positive feedback. Example, a photo of a proud, thin, youthful-looking Christian woman standing with her growing litter in front of a $5 million barn. Cheese! I wrote a caption, "Sometimes I can't believe this is my actual honest-to-God life." And then I pressed post. It was the most important day of my life, the day I stopped working on my husband, my farm, my family, and returned to work on an old, beloved project, myself. Between the thirst trap as a concept and Natalie's resolve to focus on herself, there is a unity of intent, which is to make herself the center of her own as well as others' orbit. On page 247, Natalie reflects, "The goal of an influencer is not to be lovable, and it is not to be unbearable. The goal is to be both at once. In other words, addicting." Indeed, the influencer says, "Look at me, look at my $5 million barn, look at my growing family, look at all these things that you will probably never achieve, and keep looking."
Gaze upon it in envy, my friend.
That's the motto of an influencer. Look at me. Whereas Jesus and those of us who he has set free indeed say not, "Look at me," but "Come and see." That's what Jesus said when he spoke to John's disciples in John 1:39. "Come and you will see." And it's what the woman at the well said after she had spoken to Jesus and he offered her living water. She ran into town in John 4:29 and told everyone around, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did." The fact of the matter is, we can try and make our lives look influencer perfect, enviable, and addictive, saying, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." But Jesus knows the truth. He knows everything that we have ever done and ever will do. And yet, he still extends his hand and says, "Come and see how much I love you." And that is my invitation to you today. If you do not know the Lord of all grace, who died in your place, paid the penalty for your sins so that you could be forgiven and reconciled to the only perfect content creator to ever exist, I pray that you would come and see the man, Jesus Christ, who saved a wretch like me. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that this was edifying, encouraging, and entertaining, and I hope you will continue to join me as I visit many good books, but live in the Bible. I would like to think it's the bicep that's causing this shirt not to fit anymore. 4 hours later. I miss Little Bean. You know who you are.